Today we have Ibis Valdes with us. She is a diversity and inclusion consultant. We had a great time with her in this interview. She's going to teach us why this is important and how small businesses can apply strategies to make sure they have all the diversity and inclusion in place.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Coffee with Founders. We're here with Ibis Valdes. She's the founder of Ibis Valdes Consulting. So we'll let her introduce herself and tell us a little bit of what she does. It's an amazing interview. We're very excited to have you here. So thank you for your time, Ibis, and being here with us.
No, of course, so much. Thank you for having me. So a little bit about myself. My name is Ibis Valdes. I am an entrepreneur. I am a diversity and inclusion consultant. Generally speaking, I do business coaching, specializing in diversity and inclusion strategy. And I'm really excited to answer any questions you're going to have for me.
That is awesome. So, why don't we start from the beginning? How did you get involved in this, and why did you decide to start consulting in this area that is very specific?
Sure. So I started, I would say about 10 years ago. So I was in college. I went to college to study. I've always had an interest, I think, in people and their stories and how to make people's lives better. That I always knew since I was younger. So at first I thought I wanted to do psychology, but then I went into political science. But during my time in college, I was part of a grassroots activist movement calling for raising consciousness about people who were, suffering sexual abuse, sexual assault. And the problem is that because it's so uncomfortable to deal with, especially because a lot of times it could be he said, she said, institutions like schools and employers, sometimes they have tricks to discourage people from moving forward with reporting, an allegation like that. So for example, like they will prolong certain parts of the process so that the person gets discouraged and basically drops out of the process. So therefore it's not reported as a statistic at the end. This was 2011, 2012. So this was around the time when, for example, there was a star athlete that was being accused that was winning a lot of important awards for a school, or the parents were wealthy donors and the school depended on their donations to maintain certain programs or because they named a certain hall after them. And so I was part of a movement that demanded justice and equality for people just getting their due process. And if they wanted to go through the process just to be heard. So that was a very powerful movement for me because I saw the impact of what giving a platform to people going through a certain experience can do for them, how it validates them. It creates a sense of community, a sense of awareness that then leads to action. And so I was invited to interview in 2013 for a documentary called The Hunting Ground, which very specifically was about investigating these reports and this phenomenon of students that wanted to come forward, but that were discouraged at any point of the process, whether by the institution, their peers, the school administrators. And so in 2016, or rather, let's go back a second, 2015, we had heard from the producers of this documentary that Lady Gaga was so moved by the content of this documentary and by the experiences that mirrored her own, because she herself was a victim of sexual abuse when she was 19 years old. She was entering the music industry. We all remember she started very young, over 10 years ago. And unfortunately, she was raped by a producer. And she didn't feel comfortable coming out with it or seeking action on it. So when she saw this documentary, she felt very impacted and wanted to contribute a song. So she composed and recorded a song, which was then nominated for an Oscar award in 2016. All of us who participated in the documentary were invited to join the stage with her. So that was a very powerful moment because she ultimately did not want to present the song alone. She wanted to show that it could be anyone of any race, any gender, sexual orientation, any background that can be affected by this. And so I think that was a very big moment for me of like, wow, all these years of effort and activism that, had its redemptive moment. And now we're being, recognized on a global stage. And so since then, I went to get my master's in international human rights law. And so just delving deeper into matters of human rights, like how do you define human rights standards? I had a class full of people from all over the world. It was the first time in my life that American voices were not the dominant ones in the room. We were maybe 5. So it was people from Africa, people from Asia, people from all over Latin America, a lot of Canadians as well. All of us discussing, you know, like what is the standard of human rights in your country?
And that gives you a broader perspective,
absolutely.
right? Understanding that maybe the concept that you have in mind is not the same as somebody else that's coming from the other side of the world. So let's define that together.
Exactly. So we would review, for example, laws. We would discuss, for example, like child corporal punishment, which is, I know, is a very delicate subject. You know, in some cultures, it's very acceptable to, you know, give your kid a slap if they're misbehaving. In other countries, you don't touch the child at all. Yeah. So it'd get really uncomfortable when we were dealing with how we were raised personally, what we think is right, what the other person thinks is right. So it was a really great learning lesson on how to navigate very uncomfortable conversations. Or, for example, like laws that either encourage or prohibit women from covering their heads or wearing certain religious artifacts, you know, up to like, where do you draw the lines, you know? So I think it was a really big lesson in cultural relativity and how to navigate these situations and conversations. And so I came back to Miami 2017 and I worked in refugee resettlement. I managed the refugee employment program. I've also been most recently in the private sector as a business coach. And I've realized through these 10 years of all these very colorful experiences, they all had a common theme, which was, you know, going back to the beginning, getting to know people, being curious about their stories and helping to make their lives better. And so I noticed that the D&I, diversity and inclusion field, was really kind of coming up in the mainstream consciousness. And I'm like, wow, it's possible to consult entrepreneurs and companies on how to navigate these situations. That's really great. And so just given everywhere where I'm from Miami, but I've lived in Latin America, I've been to the Northeast and back. I think just traveling the hemisphere up and down, I think I'm really interested in translating those experiences and those lessons into strategy for my clients to be able to use on the job.
You were touched by this personally, right? And then you wanted to translate all that to companies. How do you translate that message that is so broad and so unknown, so confusing? So many people ignore it, maybe because they don't know, they don't understand it. It's hard, like you said, so many people have different concepts. How do you start so that first off, companies understand the importance of it?
Absolutely. So I think when you think of diversity and inclusion, I think the first thing that comes to people's mind is unconscious bias training, diversity training. It tends to be thought of as a very collective activity, a workshop, one and done, or we have to do this for like ethics compliance. But there's really so much more to it. Like now, especially where we are in 2021, think about it. We're 21 years into the 20th century, what we all thought was a future when we were kids, right? Flying cars, everything is automated. Like we have super powerful mini computers just sitting in our pockets, you know? And so there's so much more that we can do now with the awareness that we have. And, you know, not just with technology advancing, culture has also changed. You know, I think like what we've seen this year, like I've never seen Pride month more like open and loud and really emphasizing like the importance of celebrating Pride, not just as like a fun gay party, but really recognizing like the significance of what LGBT Pride means. You know,
what it
like,
means to stand out. Yeah,
absolutely. Just the fact that just in the United States alone, women in the 60s and 70s could not take out a credit line without their husband's signature. A lot of people don't know that. So just from the 20th century to the 21st century, there have been so many changes in terms of how people feel comfortable with their sexuality, in terms of gender equality, in terms of racial equality. And so the market is changing. Different kinds of people now have, you know, more money in their pockets that they're able to invest, they're able to spend. I think just last year with the protest for racial equality, what I have noticed in particular is a lot of focus on Black entrepreneurship. How are we investing in Black and Brown communities so that they have their own capital, so that they're able to grow their own businesses and invest and interact in the market on par with different kinds of companies and investors and people. And so it really makes you think on a whole, there's a lot of really great situations that you can use diversity and inclusion strategy for. So beyond just trainings are great, workshops are great, but as part of a whole strategy. So what I like to do to get started is a master assessment. So that costs anywhere from $250 to $500. So I put all of my prospective clients through that because I just like to get an idea of what are your practices, what do you do, what do you not do, So therefore I can put together a custom package of, for example, I'm working with a solopreneur. This lady is a parent coach. So she's just one team. She has her vendors and her people, but for the most part, she is a one-woman show. I'm testing her website for accessibility. If someone is visually impaired or deaf, are they able to navigate all of her content, her website, her social media without a problem? Is there enough color contrast so that people who are colorblind and visually impaired can read things that she has on her website? If you have two colors that are too similar, it may not register with some people. I like to say, fun fact, the reason why Facebook is blue, much like this, is because Mark Zuckerberg is colorblind. He cannot distinguish between red and green. So that's why he made Facebook very blue. So it's really interesting how a lot of things that we take for granted are because of accommodations that people have made in order for people like themselves and other similar people to be able to experience something altogether.
When it comes to business, I think it's something that is very new. Like most people don't really understand, like, okay, how can we make this happen in a business center where, okay, yeah, you know, and we've heard a lot about women versus men getting equal wages and salaries being equal. But so when it comes to employees, when it comes to customers, like how do you see that applying, or how do you help a small business especially like get involved in this and being aware of it? Because it's really hard, you know, as a small business, as an entrepreneur, like you have a lot of things to take care of and you're trying to succeed, you're trying to stay alive as a small business. How do you make sure that, okay, this is as important, or this is going to help you succeed as much as, you know, selling whatever your product is, and you need to take care of this? How do you manage to do that?
Absolutely. So what I tell people is that diversity and inclusion strategy is market research, because, you know, if you want to be able to sell your product or service to more kinds of people, hiring a diversity and inclusion strategist, it will be super important to be able to enhance or modify your product and service so that it can just simply reach more markets. Avoiding discrimination lawsuits. You know, if a potential customer, a vendor, a partner has a really bad experience, they feel discriminated against, and they threaten to sue, it's much better to pay the cost of a consultant to help you identify where the weak points are so you can address them proactively, as opposed to reacting to be it, for example, a really bad Yelp review that says, oh, because of what I look like or who I am or whatever, I wasn't treated well. That could end really badly for your business's reputation. Or if you end up in if someone has the money and the time to take you to court, even worse. So this is a proactive measure in order to avoid any of that. And it's also just, it's leadership development is what I tell people first and foremost. I don't care where you are in the, whether you're a bigger company, so you have, for example, your manager, your supervisor, your staff, or you're more of a horizontal kind of organization. Everyone is a leader in their own capacity. So if you are taught and best practices on how to talk to people, how to ask people questions, how to collaborate with others, learn different people's styles, learn what could be influencing someone's behavior, it's just such a good investment in the long run. That will mean that your business will become more sustainable, more resilient, and more adaptable to changing, cultures and needs and things that will inevitably come up along the way.
Totally. And I think we kind of talked about it before in the beginning of the call. A lot of people don't know what diversity and inclusion is, right? So It's so broad. It includes so many things. Where do you start? Is it even a priority? Like you said, do I know it's a priority? How do I start applying it? Is it within my team? Is it for customers? So let me ask you this. Why do you think it's so hard for those customers? Is it because they don't understand? Is it because they don't have a strategist with them? Is it because they don't think they have the time? And tying that question, I would want to know, what do you think it's their biggest challenge when they have the information to apply it?
Definitely. I mean, I would say first and foremost, the biggest challenge is exactly that, not knowing how to apply it. I mean, the biggest weakness I see in the general field, it's always talked about in a very broad manner. Like you'll tend to see certain phrases over and over again, like diversity drives inclusion, drives innovation, D&I is good for your business. But what I want to see more of out there, which is exactly what I'm contributing, is very practical applications. When your website is more accessible, when you change your colors, when you change your format, this is how many more people it could reach. When you invest in leadership development training, this is how many less situations of conflict resolution you're going to have to get into. When you invest in this kind of training, this is how many more lawsuits you're avoiding. You know, I think when you see the real numbers and real applications that translate into like this, you know, the high stakes that small businesses are facing every single day, you know, when you invest in something, this is what you avoid, this is what you prevent, and this is what you encourage. And so I think that's what makes the biggest sell. Like, I know when I tell people about the work I'm doing with clients, you know, in terms of like working on their website to increase the accessibility aspect of it, it's very concrete. It's very much applicable. I hear all the time, like, wow, I never thought about that before. Exactly. And see how many more people you're reaching now, among so many other things that you can do as well.
I can totally see that.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because, you know, in the example of the website, and because, you know, people are thinking they're spending so much money and time now, we all do, in digital marketing, and we want to expand through marketing. And you're talking now about colors. And I think, you know, colors is something that identifies a brand. You know, you see that blue and you see Facebook and you relate right there to it. So when you come to consult a company and you suggest, you know, I think the colors have to change a little bit, we have to do this, how do you manage to collide these two things? You know, like, we need to be complying on what we're trying to do, but at the same time, you want to keep the brand and you want to keep what the business is doing in terms of marketing and branding and everything. So how do you manage to keep those two together so you're not coming in as, you know, you have to change your brand, you have to change your website, and it comes out like, okay, I need to redo my brand to be able to accomplish this other goal, you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, how do you adapt it without changing who you really are?
I think that is the foundation of my work. I tell prospective and current clients, I'm not here to change the way you do things so drastically that you end up not being you anymore. I'm doing this all keeping true to your voice, keeping true to your reputation with clients, if it's a good one. That's why I take a lot of care in doing things like assessments and doing things like one-on-one strategy calls, so that I understand their voice and I'm not compromising who they are so much just to reach this objective. Because in the end, I consider that a failure. You know, if the end product changes so much that you can't recognize them, you can't see them, you know, they're just, they've lost the essence of who they are, then absolutely, I would say that would be a failure in terms of work. So that's why it's really important to always have in that balance, you know, making those necessary modifications so that you are evolving with where markets are going, where needs are going, but at the same time, keeping true to what makes you, you know,
the idea that they have of who they are and the brand that they build. And I think I'm interested in, you know, learning a little bit more about your own experience in your consulting business as a founder, as a local business owner, because you practice, of course, diversity and inclusion. You teach diversity and inclusion strategies for other people. What is your biggest challenge when applying those techniques, when applying those strategies in your own business?
I would say my biggest challenge, but also my biggest success at the same time, is reading the room and understanding how to translate this very important message to so many different kinds of people. Because I know that, I mean, unfortunately, in this environment where things get politicized so quickly. So for example, a word or a phrase that means very well and has a very specific definition and application, you know, when it gets sucked up into the blogosphere or Twitter or wherever it goes, and it just turns out into something completely different than what it started out as, it can be really frustrating trying to justify the integrity and the purpose of certain things when people already have a very specific impression or preconceived notion of what it is. So it doesn't matter whether I'm talking to someone in the financial sector or in the nonprofit sector or in the private sector, just learning how to read the room and learning, okay, if I talk about this kinds of situations as opposed to other situations, this is what will resonate with that client better, with this situation better, so that it's not one size fits all. I think that when you approach these kinds of delicate topics or important conversations with a one size fits all approach, that's when you know you've already lost half the room. So every time I'm asked to give a speech or a workshop or something, I do a lot of research into who exactly I'm speaking to, what would resonate with them, down to the vocabulary, down to my, every word, to different situations, so that I know I'm entering prepared in a way that is culturally compatible. Because if you're going to give the same speech to a group of bankers as you would have a group of, airline pilots, as opposed to nonprofit people, the concept will be lost on all of them. So it's about doing your research on different kinds of people so that you can translate a very worthy concept that is universal, but to different groups so that it makes sense. It lands.
Yeah. I can totally see that. It's so hard because you may have the willingness to do it, the willingness to teach that. You have a great concept, but if you don't translate that message to the other side of the room, then you're not communicating that effectively, and they're not going to change anything.
No, and I think it's interesting that, because I mean, what you're trying to give a message to all different kinds of people and all different industries. And that was kind of my question. I think it's very interesting when you're talking about bankers, when you're talking about pilots, when you're talking about nonprofit. At the end of the day, they all have to do this, and it applies to everyone, but it applies in a different ways. So I'm interested to see where you struggle the most, or where are your clients where you're like, okay, this is where I need to prepare, or these are tough. And what are the reasons why some clients are going to be more open or more willing to collaborate and include this into their businesses, and some others that are not,
Yeah, maybe there's a common pattern that you've seen from working with clients.
Right. I mean, I would say, for example, like I would say like the struggle I find specifically in South Florida, right? South Florida, which is where I'm from. My family came here in the 80s. They're immigrants as well. And so I think when you have like that, the mentality of like the immigrant struggle, like you're here to hustle. You are here to, as my dad says, ganarte los frijoles, so that you go back home and feed your kids, feed your family, feed yourself. So a lot of this can be, oh, that's just, we just need to work and make our money. Like what are this concept is so fluffy, wishy-washy, that belongs in different places. Like that was a big insecurity of mine, because I know, for example, doing this kind of thing, be it in the Northeast or on the West Coast, like, people get it. It's a lot more commonplace, maybe not as well practiced. There are critiques I have of different kinds of places that seem more aware on the outside, but not quite on the inside. But that being said, I think South Florida, it's like totally new terrain. So a big insecurity I had was like, oh gosh, am I going to be perceived a certain way? Am I going to be criticized for, oh, this is like useless, or it doesn't apply here. We're just trying to work and make our bank. But it's really making the challenge for me was making it as a business case, explaining it to different kinds of people. How can I convince two radically different kinds of people about the case for investing in this from the beginning as a proactive measure rather than a reactive measure? I know that, like, working with a client now, her biggest insecurity was, she was saying, I just feel so scared. I felt so scared about the subject because I feel like I need to know everything. I need to know about every single kind of client, every kind of culture and background, and how to accommodate everyone. And so when you overwhelm yourself with all these expectations of what you think you have to know, of course, it's like a car that's overheating, and then, the engine is working super hard, but you end up going nowhere, just paralyzed out of fear. And so what I tell that group of people is, you don't have to know everything. The point is, working with someone like me, you establish the practices that will always keep the door open and revolving, so that anyone who comes into your periphery seeking your services or seeking your products is able to feel welcome and at home with very specific techniques, questions, practices. I'm never going to guarantee that you'll be able to serve everyone, because that's not the point. That's why we have diversity in the market itself. Like, especially in the co-working space market, maybe you're not the correct space for certain kinds of entrepreneurs, but you have a network of referrals of like, oh, maybe let me send you here. I think these people will be able to accommodate you, and vice versa. Someone else goes to them. Oh, maybe you're not a good fit here, but let me refer you to someone with these two, right? And so that it's really about maintaining best practices to help keep the door always revolving, so that you can meet any kind of changing circumstance with the right toolbox.
For sure. I'm thinking from a marketing perspective.
Yeah.
You're always taught to work with a target audience, to learn who your target audience is, who's your ideal client, how do they talk, how do they behave, how do they navigate on your website, how do they make a purchase, right? What do they want to hear from you? But what you're saying, it's not contradictory, which I want to make that point clear. It's you will still have a ideal client with an ideal message. You're talking to them. However, let's not close the doors for everybody else that might be a client, that might be a good fit for you, and you don't even know. So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ibis, I'm thinking numbers are going to help you a lot when you're talking to a client and you want to tell them how important what you do is, right? Showing them this is how your website is behaving now versus how it will behave in the future by including all of these strategies. Is that something you use? Is that something you've seen has helped? If people don't know?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Or something else about, because now that, especially since before the pandemic, a lot of outreach and marketing has been moving online anyways. But I think the pandemic really accelerated that because that's where a lot of us were living without being able to interact with people in real time. And so investing in D&I for your digital marketing can be so effective. The fact that, for example, you have really great, I love themed months like Black History Month, like Women's History, like Pride Month, because it's a really great focus of intention for certain communities, for certain situations. And you can use those months or those days as a great foundation for very effective marketing campaigns. Like now that there is Pride, investing in a D&I consultant like me, helping you do research on, what is the LGBT market in your area? What are hashtags that they respond to? How can they find you if you curate very authentic, culturally compatible marketing campaigns about, around them and their month, but also highlighting your product, again, in a way that is sensitive, in a way that is, because I know there's a lot of criticism as well. And this is what a consultant can help you to navigate. I know that there's been sometimes like kind of insensitive, like what they say, rainbow washing of products or services where, in terms of your business practices, you're not exactly inclusive of the LGBT community. LGBT people may not feel welcome, whether it be in your store or using your products and services, but because you're aware that there's, the movement, the hashtag is trending, you like jump onto the train without having everything ready before you get on that train.
And that's interesting. A lot of people just join causes because they're trendy.
Yeah.
And they're just happening around and they want to be part of that movement. But does it really apply to you? Or you're really adapting what's going on to you? Which brings me to a very interesting question. I know you work on assessing where the companies stand, right? And then you go from there. You work on what they need and how it applies and what you could do with them. Think about those small companies that are not thinking about diversity and inclusion right now. Maybe they don't have the budget to hire a consultant. Maybe they're just getting started, right?
Right.
What advice would you give to them? Maybe one or two things that they can look at, that they can start making changes, or they can start thinking about in the early stages.
Yeah, and I think to add to that question, because I think it's important that a lot of times when we're uneducated and we don't know, we're also afraid, even though you have good intentions to include people, since I feel like lately it's been a very sensitive topic, and it's hard sometimes you try to include people, but you don't want to come across as offensive, or you don't want to come across like you're being offensive basically, and instead of including people, you're actually coming across as you're excluding them. So I think as a entrepreneur, and I'm an uneducated on the topic for this matter, I feel like a lot of times I'm even afraid of talking about it because I don't know enough, and I feel like that's kind of why sometimes we don't do it, just because that reason.
Yeah, because it's for a lot of people, it's super new. I mean, even for me, having worked in human rights advocacy for 10 years, I did not come across the topic formally until maybe 3 to 4 years ago, to give you an idea.
Yeah.
And when I learned that I can translate a lot of my knowledge into an actual career, I said, wow, this is so cool. But you would expect someone like me to have known about it a lot earlier, right? Yeah. But even then, it was kind of new for me as well. So I would say, just because there is, what I love about digital outreach is that now content marketing is so in, being able to share information for free is what draws people in. So the first tip to get just good information for free, follow people like me online. I'm always posting, I like to share free tips, techniques, and tricks, because I think it's important for me to be able to ground the topic for certain, you know, in certain ways that seem very applicable and like it's important to do, you know, exactly like you said, like if it's not on someone's radar, what would put it on someone's radar? So following people like me is the first tip. And second, there are so many free resources out there. Like I just took through University of South Florida, USF, a free diversity and inclusion management course that would have cost like $2,000, but they were offering the certificate course for free. So me and 150,000 people that took it online just got a free certificate. If you're on LinkedIn in particular, there are free 20 to 30 minute videos that you can watch that cover, for example, leadership development, unconscious bias. There's a lot of free stuff out there that even just engaging in one or two, you know, pieces of content or like a free video here and there can make a really big difference in your awareness. And then once you have the budget, then you have, you know, more of a foundation to be able to, you know, ask certain questions, seek out very specific. Again, I can help you with that, but I love it when people come to me already with a certain foundation, right, you know, of like why this is important and why it's so, you know, urgent for them to seek out someone like myself. And maybe there's a lot of free stuff out there.
Yeah, that's so good. And we're going to ask you to share the link of that course so that we can share it in the comments. Yeah. In the caption of the video on YouTube. This has been a great interview. I knew we had a feeling that we had to talk to you because we were not expert on the field. And I know a lot of business owners and small companies in the area, local founders, local entrepreneurs don't know this either. So I think after they watch this interview, they're going to be able to, they're going to get curious and they're going to start reading about it. They're going to reach out to you, or at least they're going to start thinking and considering something important. So we really appreciate the effort and everything you do into making this something that is a priority for every business, for, you know, working hard in including so many people and just teaching people how to do it. Ibis, thank you so much. This has been great. Very, very helpful interview.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
No, this was awesome. And we'll see you all next week in Coffee with Founders.